Hollywood, California, a city where American dreams are born. Mary Ellen didn't want to live in real time. She wanted to revel in a world of fantasies where everyone would bow before her. This woman's dream became a nightmare for her husband. Once upon a time, Mary Ellen was a femme fatale, but behind her attractive exterior lurked a greedy monster. Bob didn't know this, and he paid the price. In early December 1988, a small-time dealer of illegal substances named Jimmy Bernstein was preparing to carry out a job. His target was Bob Samuelson. Samuelson had built a successful career as a Hollywood cinematographer, but he was forced to play the lead role in the bizarre story of his own demise. The problem with Hollywood is that sometimes it's hard to distinguish fantasy from reality. Bob Samuelson worked on fantasies but lived in the real world. As an assistant cinematographer, Bob worked behind the scenes. For the past few weeks, he had been spending long hours on the set of Lethal Weapon 2. It's an irony he would never live to appreciate. Jimmy Bernstein was a rookie hitman who had never taken a life. He was hired for this job by Bob's wife, Mary Ellen. She dreamed of getting rid of her husband. Mary Ellen Samuelson was a truly wicked woman. She used everyone who crossed her path, and she did it for financial gain. Beauty is just an outer shell, and beneath it can hide a vile, malicious soul. How did a beautiful Hollywood lady turn into a harpy hunting her own husband? To understand this, let's go back in time. Robert Samuelson grew up in a small town in California, surrounded by fields and orange groves, where kids could safely play in the streets. Bob had dreams and talent. He loved photography, and all his friends believed that one day he would apply his talent to something truly important. The young man studied and began working as an assistant cinematographer on major projects. Movie stars loved Bob for his easygoing nature and hard work. Of course, apart from interacting with famous actors, Bob's job wasn't exactly easy. It involved long hours behind the camera, irregular work days, constant travel, and a crazy schedule. But Bob handled his duties excellently. Professionally, everything was going well for him. However, his job took a toll on his personal life. Not every woman was willing to tolerate his constant absence. Robert desperately wanted to settle down and start a family, though he had nearly given up on finding the right woman to be his wife. One day, the man met the girl of his dreams. In fact, they had known each other since high school, when boys of all ages dreamed of the beautiful Mary Ellen Gurnick. For Bob back then, she was an unattainable ideal. A single glance at her left him speechless. It's a pity Bob didn't see beyond her external beauty. Mary Ellen Gurnick was the prettiest girl in class. She shone in school plays and was the prom queen. After graduating high school, Mary Ellen set out on a path to fame. But she didn't get far. She appeared in a couple of commercials, but her slender legs didn't lead her to Hollywood. Instead, Mary Ellen, still a teenager, got married, divorced, and decades after high school, returned to her hometown as a single mother with a daughter named Nicole. That's when she met Bob Samuelson. Now Bob was surrounded by Hollywood's glow, and the once unattainable prom queen deigned to interact with him. At first, they seemed very happy, full of energy and enthusiasm. Soon, Mary Ellen played the lead role in her own movie called Wedding, tying the knot with Bob Samuelson in 1980. Before we go any further, please support my channel. Put a like on the video and write in the comments from which city and state you are watching me. Thank you. The young wife and her child moved into her husband's house. Bob adopted Nicole and always tried to be a caring, loving, and hard-working family man. He did everything to ensure his wife and daughter were happy and wanted for nothing. And Mary Ellen finally realized her long-held dream. She entered Hollywood's star-studded scene. The woman probably hoped for a glamorous life. But in reality, they lived in an ordinary house in the San Fernando Valley. Every morning, Bob got up and went to work. She had to take care of the house, cook dinner, and handle household chores. At some point, Mary Ellen got bored. Parties where she could shine were rare. Every morning, the woman struggled to wake up, drank her cappuccino, and felt miserable. She wasn't at the center of the celebrity universe. People knew her only as the wife of cinematographer Bob. Her husband's adoring gaze didn't make her life any sweeter. What happens when your dreams of paradise crash into the ground? There's always a choice: accept it or take action. Mary Ellen chose to act. She began buying provocative outfits, attending various parties, and meeting shady characters. Bob knew his wife was cheating on him. They separated several times because of this, but Mary Ellen always found a way to win her husband back. When friends hinted to Bob that he needed to rethink his marriage, he didn't listen. The man was willing to do anything to preserve his relationship with his beloved. He wasn't the type to give up at the first sign of trouble. Realizing that Mary Ellen was dying of boredom while he was away at work all day, Bob came up with an activity for her. He bought a small sandwich shop and made his wife the manager. He wanted to keep her occupied to save their marriage. But selling sandwiches in the San Fernando Valley wasn't Mary Ellen's dream. It was her nightmare. It took Bob Samuelson several years to realize he had a slight problem with perceiving reality. The school's most beautiful girl, whom every guy dreamed of, was now his wife. Bob loved Mary Ellen dearly, but she wasn't the person he had fantasized about in high school. Life had changed her significantly. Most likely, Mary Ellen married Samuelson for his money and bright prospects. The woman's childhood couldn't be called happy. Becoming Bob's wife, she got a taste of the good life. For 4 years, Mary Ellen tried to play the role of a caring spouse, but then she grew tired of it. Among her acquaintances, Samuelson was the only decent man with family values and a steady job. Most of the people Mary Ellen associated with either sold illegal substances or used them. The sandwich shop, meant to provide the woman with income and entertainment, didn't meet her expectations. As soon as Bob left for a shoot, the shop was inevitably robbed, with all the earnings taken. Samuelson even bought his wife a special safe, but Mary Ellen kept leaving the money in the cash register. In reality, she was the one playing the role of the robber. By associating with shady characters, the woman became addicted to white powder, which consumed all her money. Let's not forget that Mary Ellen had a daughter. By the time her mother went off the deep end, Nicole was already a teenager. The schoolgirl grew up surrounded by lies and manipulation. She quickly learned how to manipulate men and young guys, guided by her own mother. Nicole Samuelson was an attractive 16-year-old girl. She learned early on to dress provocatively and frequent bars. She and Mary Ellen were like twins. Once, the mother and daughter showed up at a wedding ceremony their family was invited to, wearing matching skin-tight leather jumpsuits, looking like two Catwomen. To say it was inappropriate would be an understatement. They just loved being the center of attention. Most of the time, Mary Ellen hung out with Nicole's friends. They partied together in clubs, drank, and smoked weed. It didn't bother the woman that the girls were underage. She dressed to show off everything she could, wearing miniskirts, high heels, and revealing tops. Bob Samuelson paid for all these indulgences. In truth, he wasn't so much concerned about the money. He was more worried about Nicole, whom he always treated as his own daughter. Bob was upset that Mary Ellen wasn't the best mother and had a negative influence on the girl. Finally, in 1986, Bob admitted to himself that their marriage was doomed. After 6 years of marriage and heated arguments, Mary Ellen moved into a rented apartment, taking Nicole with her. Bob was devastated, while his wife simply enjoyed life, as Samuelson continued to pay all her bills. After the separation, he supported Mary Ellen and her lifestyle, and her demands were substantial. Bob's heart was breaking, and his wallet was bursting at the seams. Mary Ellen spent money on her pleasures: clothes, jewelry, trips, white powder. This went on for a couple of years. Deep down, Bob fantasized that one day, the woman of his dreams would come to her senses and return. Mary Ellen knew what her ex-husband wanted, but had no intention of becoming someone she never was for his sake. The winter holidays of 1988 were not the best time for Bob. He was preparing to spend Christmas alone in an empty house. That year, something shifted in Samuelson's mind. In the fall, when Bob turned 40, he decided it was time to move on, and he seriously considered divorce. Although Mary Ellen and Bob had been living separately for 2 years, they were still officially married. Mary Ellen did the math and quickly realized that a divorce would be a disaster for her. Like in a Hollywood movie, becoming a widow was a far more advantageous option. The woman had long been searching for someone to take responsibility and rid her of her tiresome husband. With divorce looming, Mary Ellen grew desperate to find an executor willing to help her gain access to her husband's money. She spoke so often and so much about hating her husband that no one took her words seriously anymore. There were a couple of people who agreed to eliminate Bob. They discussed various methods of disposal with the future widow, from an attack to staging an accident. Then they took the money and disappeared. It was immediately clear what kind of people Mary Ellen associated with. The woman believed no one took on the job because she was no longer young and not as beautiful as in her youth. To inspire a man to commit a crime, it took not only money but also feminine charm. Since Mary Ellen was inseparable from her daughter, she decided to involve her in solving the problem. She used her 16-year-old daughter to find a hitman, drawing Nicole into this sinister plot. But even that didn't work right away. They were lucky that Mary Ellen had a knack for spotting vulnerable and weak-willed men. Hollywood is a city where it's every man for himself. If you don't become a star, you're nobody, like Jimmy Bernstein, a slippery, unscrupulous con man. Thanks to Mary Ellen, he could become a star in a game called Take Someone's Life. James Bernstein, a tall, heavy-set loner, deftly fell into the trap, becoming prey. He had no friends. He made a living selling illegal substances. Any normal mother would keep her underage daughter far away from such characters. But Mary Ellen could hardly be called a sane mother, as she personally pushed Nicole to start a romance with Bernstein. Of course, Jimmy was over the moon. Girls rarely paid attention to him, so he couldn't believe his luck and even proposed to Nicole, giving her a ring. For 16-year-old Nicole, it was nothing more than a game. At the time, she was dating 2 young men simultaneously, and each was ready to marry her. She simply switched engagement rings depending on who she was going out with. But Jimmy didn't know he was one of 2 potential fiancés. The guy was genuinely in love and considered Nicole his fiancée. Meanwhile, Mary Ellen seized every opportunity to tell her future son-in-law that Bob Samuelson was an evil, cruel man who had repeatedly harassed her young daughter. She complained that her ex-husband had abused Nicole when she was a child. And then, when the girl grew up, the man violated her. To back up her claims about her aggressive husband, Mary Ellen showed bruises on her neck and shoulders. She said Bob had attacked her during a meeting. In reality, she had simply undergone plastic surgery. The dim-witted Jimmy easily swallowed the bait. His anger and hatred toward Bob Samuelson grew with each passing day. That's exactly what the mother and daughter were aiming for. They nurtured this feeling in the guy and wanted Bernstein to desire to send Bob to the afterlife himself. It was part of their brilliant manipulation. Jimmy truly believed that the girl he loved had been abused by her evil stepfather. Now, Mary Ellen had her own hitman. In reality, Robert Samuelson was never a cruel husband, despite the fact that his wife and daughter did everything possible to tarnish his reputation and make others believe in his deception. And it worked, because in the end, closer to the holidays, Jimmy Bernstein was consumed by an overwhelming desire to protect his beloved. It was the perfect moment for Mary Ellen, who learned that Bob was planning to file for divorce. The woman even slipped Jimmy $1,500 in cash to keep his enthusiasm alive and ensure he carried out the mission entrusted to him. Bob Samuelson occasionally saw Mary Ellen and Nicole. He even had a premonition that something bad was about to happen. Once, the man told his loved ones that he had lived a wonderful life and had done everything he wanted. But now, Bob was determined, saying he would divorce Mary Ellen and put an end to their marriage. At the time, no one understood the meaning of his strange premonitions. This became clear a little later. Mary Ellen was also ready to see her plan through to the end. She was a good actress when, in the dim light of the seedy bars of the San Fernando Valley, she played the role of an aggrieved and caring mother. And she managed to deceive Jimmy Bernstein, who in turn hired a friend who ultimately took up the weapon. On December 7th, 1988, Bob returned from work and took a shower. The man stepped out of the bathroom when he was attacked. First, he was struck on the head. The blow from the butt of a shotgun was devastating, but Bob stayed alive. He only fell to the floor, losing consciousness. Then they placed a pillow over his head and fired. Robert Samuelson was 40 years and 2 months old when his life abruptly ended. It's unknown who pulled the trigger. Was it Jimmy Bernstein, or was it the friend he hired? Or did the guys carry out the attack together? The main thing is that Bob Samuelson was dead, and the grieving widow knew this perfectly well. The second part of Mary Ellen's plan was as follows. She left Bob a ton of messages on his answering machine, fully aware that he was no longer alive. This was supposed to serve as proof that she was not involved in her husband's death. Bob's lifeless body lay in the hallway for 2 whole days, while his ex-wife sent message after message to his phone. Only then did Mary Ellen and Nicole show up at the house. Bernstein had been instructed to make the attack look like a botched robbery, but he botched it. After the shooting, the perpetrator simply fled. The mother and daughter decided to take matters into their own hands. They pulled out drawers, overturned furniture, and even pried open the front door with a crowbar to make it look like unknown intruders had broken in. Only then, satisfied with her work, did Mary Ellen finally call 911 and report that she hadn't been able to reach her husband for several days. When she came to his house, she found him dead in the hallway. The police initially took her story at face value and began searching for the culprit. However, from the very beginning, everything looked suspicious. The attack was clearly carried out by an amateur. Detectives immediately realized there had been no burglary. It was all staged on purpose. When Mary Ellen executed her plan, she forgot to take anything valuable, and investigators noticed such details right away. At the police station, Mary Ellen continued to play the role of a grief-stricken widow. To make the detectives treat her leniently and avoid asking uncomfortable questions, the woman added a bit of flirtation to her behavior, which only heightened the officers' suspicion toward her. The police didn't buy Mary Ellen's act. They sensed that the woman had something to do with what happened to Bob Samuelson. But to prove it, they needed evidence, which, unfortunately, they didn't have. Mary Ellen walked away scot-free and continued to pose as a grieving widow. Everyone around could see how little she actually cared about her husband's death. The woman was far more concerned about what to wear to the funeral. In the end, she showed up at the church in a new, tight-fitting black dress with an open back, earning disapproval from Bob's family. The widow behaved as if it were a party, not a time for mourning. Now that Bob was 6 feet under, Mary Ellen's life drastically improved. She inherited everything he had worked for throughout his life. The widow received a tidy sum of $250,000 from Bob's insurance company and moved into his house. Instead of cleaning the carpets where the body had lain, she and Nicole simply threw another rug over the top to cover the brown stains and went on living as if nothing had happened. Once the main business was settled, Mary Ellen got down to the real task, mourning her husband's death. The widow found solace in a new Porsche, grieved in the fitting rooms of high-end stores, and wiped her tears with lace napkins. Then, Mary Ellen threw a lavish birthday party, rented a limousine, invited guests, and bought herself a condo in Cancun as a gift. Finally, she could live the life she deemed worthy of herself. However, not everything was smooth sailing. Jimmy Bernstein, Nicole's fake fiancé, was going through tough times. At some point, he realized he had been used as a pawn. The young man saw the vibrant life Mary Ellen and Nicole were living, but he was no longer part of it. Perhaps guilt or resentment toward his fiancée for betraying him made him consider turning himself in. Jimmy hinted to those around him that he'd had enough, and was going to the police to tell them everything. It seemed that Jimmy Bernstein was about to be the one to ruin Mary Ellen's perfect life. However, the widow had her own way of dealing with unwanted partners, and Jimmy instantly became her target. As mentioned earlier, Mary Ellen easily identified people she could manipulate. Usually, these were young, vulnerable guys with addictions to illegal substances. Paul Gall was one such guy. His financial situation left much to be desired, so he stood no chance against Mary Ellen, her money, and her cunning. The woman knew that Gall had lost his brother to addiction. Jimmy Bernstein was a dealer, which meant he was indirectly responsible for Gall's brother's death, and he definitely deserved to die, like all dealers distributing illegal substances. To cover her bases, Mary Ellen enlisted the support of another desperate girl and her boyfriend. The young couple also agreed to eliminate Jimmy Bernstein in exchange for settling a debt. For most women who lose their husbands, adjusting to life alone without their loved one is very difficult. Often, they need a little reset, to go somewhere, change the scenery, and distract themselves from grief. But some need to head to Cancun with a bag of money and indulge in a photo shoot with their new boyfriend. Some need to leave to find comfort and peace. Mary Ellen needed to establish an alibi because she had hired hitmen to take out the man she had tricked into killing her husband. By the way, during the photo shoot in the hotel room, the widow decided to take one picture for fun. She stripped naked, covered her body with dollar bills, and smiled broadly. That photograph would later play a role in the widow's fate. Mary Ellen had already spent most of the money inherited after her husband Bob went to his grave 6 months earlier. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Jimmy Bernstein was about to follow Bob. Paul Gall and his friend Darryl Edwards were inexperienced hitmen, so before dealing with Bernstein, they calmed their nerves with a couple of beers. In reality, it was definitely more than a couple, as a drunken Paul could barely climb into the car kindly provided by Mary Ellen. In that same car, Jimmy was sitting in the front seat. The buddies had tricked him into joining them. They were supposedly going to steal illegal substances. The plan was to strangle Bernstein in the car, but unlike Bob Samuelson, he wasn't going to die. He tried to escape, but unfortunately, not fast enough. Paul grabbed him, struck him in the throat several times, and then simply squeezed his neck with his hands and strangled him. The buddies dumped the lifeless body in a ravine, taking his ID and tossing it along the way, then returned home and continued partying. It took a month to find Jimmy's body. When investigators searched his home, they found some documents linking him to the killing of Bob Samuelson. They also found a life insurance policy for $25,000, which Bernstein had taken out the day after Bob's death. The guy had named his fiancée, Nicole, as the sole beneficiary, who soon after dumped him. Jimmy turned out to be yet another deceived man unable to distinguish his fantasies from reality. A detective summoned Mary Ellen for questioning. The woman admitted that she had once met a young man named Jimmy Bernstein in a bar and complained to him about her husband. She had no idea she had driven the guy to commit a crime against Bob. The widow suggested that he had simply fallen in love with her daughter and wanted to punish the evil stepfather. A breakthrough in the case came when the police began questioning Jimmy's acquaintances. Among them was Paul Gall's neighbor, and the girl spilled the whole story because Paul, while drunk, had let it slip. When it dawned on Gall that he could easily end up in the gas chamber for killing Jimmy Bernstein, the guy didn't hesitate to trade Mary Ellen's freedom for his own life. The woman, who had recently gotten away with 2 crimes, sat before the detective, trying every trick to lie her way out. But her ploys and manipulations didn't work on the officer. After informing her of the charges and reading her rights, the officers arrested Mary Ellen and sent her behind bars. She never thought something like this could happen to her and was completely unprepared for such a turn of events. At the trial, Mary Ellen tried to portray a desperate widow who had been insulted in the most horrific way. In her opinion, the police were to blame for everything. Officers had asked her out on dates, but she refused them. After that, Mary Ellen was accused of every mortal sin as they sought revenge for their wounded pride. Apparently, the woman still felt like the femme fatale who drove high school boys crazy. However, her performance looked ridiculous, especially compared to the prosecution's evidence. The defense brought in Mary Ellen's elderly parents as witnesses. They were very ill and frail. It was heart-wrenching to watch elderly people beg the jury to spare their daughter's life. They spoke about her unhappy childhood. At the same time, the parents knew nothing about the Cancun condo or the new Porsche. The old couple lived on a meager pension, about 2 hours' drive from the San Fernando Valley. In the year of her luxurious lifestyle, their daughter had visited her mother and father only once. The photograph of Mary Ellen posing naked, covered only with dollar bills, became key evidence of her motives and quickly spread through the media. The picture clearly showed who Mary Ellen was. Thanks to the photo, the media dubbed her the Green Widow, and that snapshot helped land the woman in California's most exclusive club, the Death Chamber. Finally, the widow would get to mingle with people who would appreciate all her talents. Mary Ellen Samuelson could have lived a good life in the real world, but she chose a different path, to live in a world of her own fantasies, where everyone would bow before her. Paul Gall testified against Mary Ellen in court. He had already served his sentence and was released on parole. His friend Darrell Edwards remained behind bars until the end of his term. Mary Ellen's daughter, Nicole Samuelson, was not charged. She changed her name, had children of her own, and refuses to recall her past. Robert Samuelson is buried in his hometown. He was a good, hard-working guy, but became the target of a criminal conspiracy and suffered only because he loved too deeply. And Mary Ellen got what she always dreamed of, the starring role in a great theatrical performance. The ending didn't match her vision, but not all fantasies become reality. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.